Welcome, everybody. It's my great pleasure to chair this morning. It's a beautiful Sunday morning here in London. I hope it's nice where you are. I think there was someone from Canada there. That's real commitment. I wonder what time it is in Canada. Middle of the night, I guess. But thank you all for being here. Yes, today's morning session, we've got Peter Fenwick, who'll be talking on non-duality at the time of death. And so Peter will start in about half past. And then after that, we'll have a break. And then Professor Harold Altmanspacher will talk about the Pauli-Jung conjecture and some of its implications. And then we'll have a plenary discussion and lunch. So that's how the morning session is laid out. And Peter's going to lead a meditation in a minute as well. But before we do that, I'm going to suggest we do a little breathing exercise to all connect. So if I suggest you go up to the top right of your screen and go to gallery view, so you can see everybody's friendly faces. And you'll see we've got about 4 pages of friendly faces at the moment. You can scroll through 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you've clicked gallery view, what I'm going to suggest is that you all put your hands up like this in front of your face so you can see them. And then we're all going to breathe in time together, and we're going to use our hands as an indicator of the timing of the breath. So we all breathe in time together. We're simply going to breathe in and bring our hands out. And then breathe out and bring our hands in. We're going to do that 9 times. Ready. And one more. Wonderful. Well, I feel more connected to you all now, so that's just fabulous. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to Peter. I think what I'll do, Peter, is if you lead the meditation and then I'll introduce you with a little mini biography after that prior to your talk. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect. And we stop at 9:30?
Yes. So just 5 minutes for the meditation.
5 minutes. That's fine. That's excellent. Okay, we'll do an eyes closed meditation. May I ask you to close your eyes? And it's also going to be a watching breath meditation, but it's going to be a meditation which brings you very much into the present where you are. And so on the in breath, you say just. And on the out breath, you say this. So breathe away at your own speed, just this. And when we've done that for 5 minutes, your mind would be nice and quiet. And just this would be the room where you are. Okay, let's go. Now take a deep breath in, hold it, and let it go, and open your eyes. Thank you. That I find a very nice stilling meditation, and I hope that you felt that as well. So you all should be nicely in the room and ready to go.
Thanks, Peter.
No.
So I'll, as you're
Okay.
getting your slides up, I shall briefly introduce you. And I'm sure that for most people present today, you all know Peter very well. If I was going to describe Peter in 2 words, it would be living legend. He's an eminent neuropsychologist and neurophysiologist, someone who's an expert in how the brain works and has spent his career advancing an understanding of how consciousness and mind extend beyond it. He's an ex-president of the Scientific and Medical Network, and originally studied at Trinity College, Cambridge, and did medicine Thomas's, and then much of his career at the Institute of Psychiatry, along with other hospitals, and he's currently emeritus at the Institute of Psychiatry. And he's written a number of excellent books, including Truth and the Light, Hidden Door, Past Lives, and The Art of Dying with Elizabeth Fenwick. And Peter, I did just see that on Amazon, Art of Dying has well over 100 reviews, almost all 5-star. So clearly doing extremely well. It's nice to see. So Peter, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we very much look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Ollie, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk, because I think it's a particularly important subject. And of course, on Remembrance Day, and the very strong feelings that are evoked about dying and death, I think it's absolutely relevant. So can you see that slide?
Yes.
Good. Okay, it's going to be in this view because I can't get it into the whole view. So you'll see the slides down by the side, but don't worry about that. So then today I'm going to talk about non-duality. I hope. Non-duality XXX. Why am I not telling you what it's about? Because as soon as I tell you this, I will change the way your brains work. And you will, in fact, behave quite differently. So let's just see what these X's cover. Death, yes. But much more important than that, you will die. And I mean you. Now, what I've done is fired up in you existential anxiety, existential terror. And this means that your brains are now set in a different way. For those of you who are interested in it, this is a very good book. It's The Role of Death in Life. It's called The Worm at the Core. And it's an excellent book by Sheldon Solomon, and it's existential anxiety. And in fact, I'm going to take one of his experiments just to show you really the power that this has over us. Because you see, we forget about the importance of existential death anxiety and how it can change our behavior. So see what you make of this. This is from Sheldon's work. 2 groups were formed and selected by a questionnaire to be the same in personality. They were all judges, remember. One half were given just the questionnaire, and the other had an additional question. How long do you think you will live? Very light, that, but that's it. Both groups were asked to judge a minor crime, a prostitute found working on the streets. And both groups had been asked about their mortality first. but the group, sorry, who had been asked about their mortality first, set a bond that was 9 times higher than the other group, which wasn't. So you can see that they already, in fact, had been affected in a very marked way. And just think that the judges are supposedly trained to administer the law evenly and rationally. Second, when the experiment was explained to them, guess what they said? No way your stupid little questionnaire could have had that effect on my behavior. So, if you're going into court, for heaven's sake, don't mention death if you want a reasonable sentence. So let's go on then and see how it affects the brain. If you look in this upper quadrant, you will see the effect of a death word to an ordinary person, and it changes the right and left insular activity, which decreases the activity in that area. And that area is related to the whole person. It's related to the immune system. It's related to your relationship with other people. So this means that terror has quite a substantial effect. So what are these effects? Whenever people are reminded of death, they love people who share their beliefs. Actually, just listen to this. They hate people who are different. They sit closer to people who share their beliefs. They sit further away from anyone who looks different. And if we give such people in a laboratory setting an opportunity to physically harm someone who's different, they become much more hostile and vicious. And they choose charismatic leaders. What's this making you think of? So this can be seen at present time in our society when the ideas of death are very prominent. So is there a way around this? Well, yes, there is. And for this, you have to go to Bhutan, a Buddhist community. It's next to Nepal and hangs on the southern slopes of the Himalayas. And unlike many of us in the West, the Bhutanese don't hide death away. And they have images of death everywhere, especially in Buddhist iconography, where you'll find colorful, gruesome illustrations. No one, not even children, are sheltered from these images or the ritual dancers reenacting death. And the Bhutanese believe that 5 reminders of death a day leads to happiness. So that has been taken up by somebody who's put out an app called We Croak. The app goes off 5 times a day and gives you a death reminder and something to contemplate about death. So I hope that you will all have that app and so become like the Bhutanese and not so afraid of death. And in fact, Hansa Bergwall has just published a book called We Croak, which goes into this and may be of interest to you. Well, the Dalai Lama has told us for many years that ignoring death has consequences for us. And as he points out, those who reject death suffer from a false sense of permanence, become more greedy, more self-serving and lustful, have more enemies, become attached to my wealth, my health, my friends, my enemies, my family. Does that sound like our society a bit? And in fact, we are terrified of death. I'm sure network people aren't. But when did you last go to a party, a group of friends, and say, well, I think I'll be buried, and I wonder what I'll have on my grave? You never say that, because one always keeps away from it. And this was called Freud's paradox, that you talk about other people's death and not your own. So sufferers who reject death have a false sense of permanence. They become more greedy, more self-serving and lustful, have more enemies, and become attached to my wealth, my health, my friends, my enemies, and my family. So does it have to be like this, or can we change? And if so, how do we change? Now, there are two opportunities to change. One is during your life, and the other is at the end of life itself. So there are, in fact, two opportunities for death, or sometimes these are called the two deaths. And what you're doing then is you're going into non-duality. So let's have a look at that and see what it means. I think quite a good place to start is with Maslow. You remember he was the father of humanistic psychology, and he constructed this pyramid, which is a hierarchy of needs. And they're all sort of straightforward: physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, self-esteem, and then self-actualization at the top. And this became really one of the cornerstones in psychology. But there was in fact another side to this, where he was talking about the peak experiences that people had. Mental states often achieved by self-actualizing individuals, which is important. Moment of highest joy and fulfillment, rare, exciting, oceanic, deeply moving, exhilarating, elevating. Experiences that generate an advanced form of perceiving reality and are even mystic and magical in their effect upon experience. Each element of perception is perceived together in a holistic manner. What's that making you begin to think about? A little bit about non-duality. That creates the moment of reaching one's full potential. And the interesting thing was that before he died, he added another layer to his pyramid called self-transcendence. And that was going beyond the high plateau of experience. So it's highly likely that he himself became non-dual towards the end of his life. So how to attain this high plateau? That's the problem, isn't it? And this, of course, is where we come into non-duality. And if this state is permanent, it is called enlightenment. Present terminology is non-duality or permanent non-symbolic experience, PNSE. And everyone assumes the enlightenment is rare, but there's growing evidence this is not so. And I would like to stress this. What sort of world will it be when we all experience this? In fact, when we all come together, when the outside and the inside are one, what will our science be like? I'd love to know the answer to that, because when you're non-dual, you are in the same world, but it's very different. So understanding non-duality, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of mind in our present condition. There's not an inside and an outside. There's just one thing, perception or experience. That's all there is, perception. Is there a perceiver? No, there's not. There's only what comes up in experience. Like waves and water. Waves are one thing, the ocean's the next, but they're all the same thing. All we know is what we experience, and it is a unity. There's no ego. That is only a mental construct. No time, no past, no future, only now. And it is the thinnest of slivers, but there's nothing before it and nothing after it. Just in the moment, experience arises. There's no agency. Agency is, can you do anything? No, you can't. But if you see somebody who's non-dual, you say, raise your hand, they raise their hand. You say, of course you've got agency. You did what I told you. And the answer is no, it was nothing to do with me raising my hand. It was to do with my perception, which in fact led to the raising of a hand. So it's different. So many of you will have come across Vevuve, who is an Irishman called Terence, can't quite see it, Terence Gray, who lived in Monaco. You'd think a very unlikely person to be a non-dual person, but he in fact worked for many years in Zen and had written a lot of books. I think probably his best one is All Else is Bondage, and I'd recommend that to the network. And he asked the question, why are you unhappy? Because 99.9% of everything you think and of everything you do is for yourself, and there isn't one. So that makes life very simple. So non-duality is not as rare as we thought. It can occur, of course, with a traditional method or be induced with traditional methods, e.g. Zen, Buddhism, and so on. You see it after some head injuries. Now, if I'm talking to somebody who's had an NDE, I always see whether they have become non-dual, because many do. It's one of the spiritual gifts they talk about. People who have severe depression and really go into their depression and clean themselves can have a change in consciousness. Occasionally happens spontaneously. And importantly for us today, shortly before death, most people become non-dual. So how can you tell when someone is non-dual? Now, what I'd like you to do, we have a number of people, well, quite a large number, I can't see it on my screen, of people in the audience. And I want you to ask yourself if you're in fact on the beginnings of the non-dual pathway. Many people are and don't really know it. So these are the questions. Ask yourself, and what I would say is come and see me after the talk, but you can send me an email. When you're talking to a non-dual person, you say, when they look at people, what do they see? So if you're non-dual, what do you see? You see people much more in terms of energy. Now, next thing, what has happened to your narrative self? The narrative self is that little voice within you that keeps talking all the time, that says, do this, don't that, makes you feel guilty, and so on. That is what is cleaned. You don't have that. Do you live only in the present? Past and future just aren't important. And in fact, you're just in that sliver of time, which is the present. Do you have any agency? So it depends where you are on the continuum. Some people still have the feelings of agency, but as you go up the continuum, you lose it. Are they deeply, deeply, deeply joyful and contented? And this is very important. And this is really the first step onto the ladder of awakening. So ask yourself, am I really deeply happy and contented? And if the answer to that is yes, then you're probably starting out on this journey, because you know that everything's going to be okay. So what sort of things will bring it on? Severe grieving after a divorce, I've seen that. Somebody whose brother died, they were really sad and went to Italy and accepted their sadness and looked at their relationship with their brother and really cleaned their personalities. They became non-dual. A head injury was followed by non-duality. Gave up completely trying to awaken. Somebody who's tried to awaken, then said that, God, you can't do it. It may suddenly dawn. After an NDE we've talked about. And now, about 70%, it is said, of people who go on the Finder's course, which is a course by Jeffrey Martin, finder's course costs a lot of money, but he's got another course which I recommend because it'll give you a taste for it, and that's 45 Days to Enlightenment. And Jeffrey Martin is the one who I think has done most scientific work in this area. He's collected over 2,500 people with permanent non-symbolic experience. He has now run 16 finders courses with a success rate of about 70%, he says. He teaches both old and new techniques, for example, meditation, less to love, headless way, Sailor Bob, and all that sort of thing. He's defined a progress in terms of locations from 1 to 10. With each change of location, the experience becomes more and more refined. And stage 3, which is an interesting one, is probably that of Christian mystics. And further stages are very similar to those of the advanced yogis. This I've taken from him. Stage 1 will really be those people who feel everything's okay and are just starting on the process. By the time you get to location 2, you've lost your ego. You're in the present all the time. Stage 3 is the Christian mystics. Now, I've met people who are stage 3, and they are enormously happy with very, very wide transcendent feelings of love. 4, you start losing your emotions. And then he divides it into 2. The path of freedom is what the yogis go along, and this is where you get this, people who can walk through walls, bilocate, all that sort of thing. And the path of humanity are people who don't want to go that far and stay here. This is from an early slide of his, just showing that this is normal, our normal self, and this is people who are awakening non-symbolic experience. So sense of self, true self, not the little self, not the ego, but the true sense of self is expanded. You have less emotion. That actually is something which I didn't like the thought of, but in fact, it's not quite like that, because degree of emotion, when you get all hassled over small things, is very much a egoic form of using emotion. Self-thoughts are less, obviously. Attachment to such thoughts are less. Degree of attachments, all attachments are less. Degree of agency, you doing things is less. And degree of peace is infinitely more. So you come into the state of the peace that passes all understanding. The factors we have just seen all contribute to mental resilience, the loss of the ego, and wide feelings of becoming one with the universe. Now think about that. Supposing you're in your lab and you've awoken and you're one with the universe, how on earth are you going to do your science? Will you do a different sort of science? And that's a question I'd really like to know the answer to. It is said that the true warrior dies twice. When one is when the ego is killed when alive, and most people, when the ego dies in the preparation for death. And that goes up on the studies to about 80 to 90%. So what are the end-of-life experiences that help us come to understand non-duality? Well, most of you have seen this picture before, so I won't spend any time on it. Just this is the dying process, premonitions, deathbed visions, a new reality we go into, then dying itself. You'll see that this little guy has changed from this rather terrifying figure I had to somebody who's much more friendly. Deathbed coincidences, terminal lucidity. You heard yesterday that in fact the NIH are started a study with Sam Parnio looking at terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity is lightening up before death, is what the Victorians called it. It is, in fact, suddenly regaining all those functions you've lost, whether it's paralysis or whether it's dementia, loss of memory, etc. Now look at all these non-local phenomena: clocks stopping, animals howling, bells ringing, lights, shapes leaving the body. It's all non-local, as indeed the deathbed coincidences. So this is a very, very special time, and I think we need to understand it better. Here's one experience when she's talking about deathbed visitors. I joined my daughter after an hour at the hospital. We both sat chatting to my mother. She spoke to me about my life and my future, all interspersed with references to these people who are now at the end of her bed. She told us that she wouldn't be there the next day, as these people would pick her up when she fell and take her on a journey. We were slightly spooked at her comments, but she was totally at ease. She insisted that we shouldn't cry, and she died the next day. So a lot of help there in the dying process. And the deathbed visitors often sit on the bed. Why? Because it's very comforting. Who are the visitors? Well, we took 102 people, and they had 118 visions, if you like. Parents were the commonest group, 24%. Persons unknown, usually described as spiritual, 17%. Holding your hands out, but you've gone so far in the process that you can't talk, 14, and so on. 3% of angels, sorry, not many angels. Interestingly, not many friends. It's mainly relatives who come, or spiritual beings. Is your cat or your dog going to come? I think that we have only got one in our series, one dog, so it's pretty rare. And so I want to focus on this moving to a new reality. It's very important. I learned about it when I was in Jamaica, lying on the sand, eating lobster at a network meeting. I recommend those meetings. And next to me, there was a lovely lady whose daughter had just died of breast cancer. And she was telling me about her daughter's experience. And she said she was conscious of a dark roof over her head and bright light. She moved into a waiting place where beings were talking to her there, and they were there to help her. Everything will be okay. They were loving beings, not a dream, and her grandfather was amongst them. And she moved in and out of this area. And it really looks as if the deathbed visitors are there to help you and prepare you for the crossing. So you get your diagnosis that you're going to die. Then there's the journey, and you go into this new reality. And now the evidence is pointing to the actual death process taking place in non-dual consciousness. This is the time, of course, where you have all these non-local effects like deathbed coincidences and so on that I've been saying. So it looks as if dying is the transformation of consciousness through the death process to non-duality. Now let's look at the evidence for that, because if it's true, it means that dying is an expansion of consciousness and not a reduction. The main work in this area comes from somebody called Monica Rentz. She is a palliative care theologian in Zurich. She's written a number of papers on fear, pain, denial, and spiritual experience in the dying process. Now, if any of you want Monica's papers, just there's my email address. Just send me an email and put in the tagline Monica Rentz in the subject line. You don't have to say, God, Peter, you do give the most fantastic talks. Oh, and by the way, can I have Monica Rentz's paper? It's not like that. Just put it in that and keep it simple. And I'll send it to you with one or two of our own. So Monica Rentz says spirituality includes more than just giving a response to a patient's spiritual attitude. Spiritual needs, as well as patient's consciousness and communication, are changing. So in other words, your consciousness is changing as you go through the dying process. Spirituality has to do with an altered connectedness and consciousness. So this puts a very different view on dying. Spiritual experiences are powerfully independent of religious attitudes. Actually, it doesn't matter what you die when you go into the dying process, because A, you'll be looked after, and B, the experiences you're having are so strong that what you believed before won't necessarily be important to you. And from those observations, fear, pain, denial, spiritual experience, she determined what she called the transition level. And I like her model very much. So there are three phases of dying: pre-transition, transition, and post-transition. Pre-transition, patients may feel needs, thirst, pain, and emotions. This is a time when you may fear you're losing control and their dignity, and realize that dying is inevitable. Now, please, we're all going to go through something like this. And will you remember that the whole point of this phase is that you give up and you clean yourself. How do you clean yourself? You give up your attachments. Blockages to moving on, there must be intense cleaning of attachments. Give up everything. And if you are confident in the dying process, it'll make it much easier for you. And I'd also recommend that you mend your broken family relationships, because they're quite a strong tether. Now we come to transition. Transition itself implies the loosening of ego consciousness, so you can see exactly what's happening. You start losing those egoic structures within you, and this is mainly through the clearing. And so you now come into the last phase of dying. If you're in this state, patients typically show physical signs of anxiety and struggle, and some patients simply stare and are restless. It's a short phase, and then you come to the expansion of consciousness. This is in the final stage, post-transition. The ego is not dominant anymore. It's gone. You've killed it. And so you're in non-symbolic or non-dual consciousness. Patients seem to be serene, in the state of being beyond anxiety and pain or powerlessness. They are unable to speak, can still hear. And such transformative experiences may be comparable to a spiritual awakening and a person who's completed the journey. So think of yourselves, when you get to this stage, you know that that's probably the last stage before your consciousness goes on. There are lots of stories which play to this. Suddenly she stared intently up at the window, and this lasted only minutes, but it seemed ages. She suddenly turned to me and said, "Please, Pauline, don't ever be afraid of dying. I've seen a beautiful light and I was going towards it. I wanted to go into that light. It was so peaceful, I really had to fight to come back. Sadly, she died the next day. But I knew she'd seen something that gave her enormous comfort." It'd be reminding many of you, I think, of the near-death experience. Now, let's just look quickly at some of Monica Rentz's data. She's done 2 or 3 theories now, and the one that we're looking at is one of her earlier ones with 80 patients. They had 3 observations a day. It's a pretty weighty study, and they rated every patient on the 4 dimensions of fear, pain, denial, and spiritual experience, which is the one that we're most interested in. Here's one of her patients, pre-transition, transition, post-transition. You can see this person is going along. This is when he or she should be doing clearing. then transition, and then they die from post-transition. Here's another one. And what I want you to feel is that we all have our own individual courses. It depends how easy it is for us to clear and clean and let go. This person did very quickly, went down into an ecstatic sort of state of non-duality from which they died. So what can we do to help us attain non-duality? Well, this is a graph, it's of her patients, and the yellow bars are little suffering, the blue bars are a lot of suffering. So you obviously want to be in this one, which is 90% have a little suffering. That, in fact, are people who've had an NDE. They've all felt they know what it is, and they know they go there. So there's a very good argument for teaching people about NDE before they die. And to give them an experience of it, there's a group in Liège now who are thinking about giving people a very small dose of ketamine to give them some idea of what the dying process is like. Meditation is a good protector, as is mystical experience. The one I like is this one here, curious. You must be curious about the dying process. And if you're curious, the reason why it's important, because you can't hold fear and curiosity. So it's a way of reducing your fear. So the second thing you've learned, apart from your rehearsal of your 5 mantras to get rid of your death anxiety and death terror, you remember to be curious when you die. So this transformation of consciousness was experienced by 90% of the dying in her series, very like the NDE world: light, love and compassion, wholeness and feelings of unity. There's the waiting area of spiritual being, and dead relatives are present. So it's important that one has an understanding of what it's going to be like. This is another account. My life partner died of AIDS-related pneumonia at home in 1991. I spent the last week lying beside him at home much of the time. But on 1 or 2 occasions, a look of sheer ecstasy lit up his face as he smiled, and it looked something I couldn't see. Now, the point is that nowadays we can control people's pain with morphine. But it's these experiences which I think are the most important. Thetis Blacker died in 2006, and she did batik paintings, and this is one of hers. And she described her dying process. I had an agreement with Thetis that when she died, I'd be there. But unfortunately, I was in Japan. So about 2 days before she died, I rang her on the telephone and said, Thetis, what's it like dying? Tell me what your experience is now. And she said, well, there are lovely rivers of love and golden light flowing through the room. So she clearly had made it into non-duality and the experience of a non-dual universe. I'll just tell you very quickly the story of an old friend, Paul Robertson. Now, many of you will have heard this story before, but I think it's an extremely good one. Paul had an NDE some years before he died. He's an amazing man, very talented musician, a very inquiring mind. He was leader of the Medici Quartet. During a half-hour operation to repair a tear in his aorta, Paul was under a general anesthetic and unconscious. His heart was stopped and his head cooled to prepare his brain for a period of brain oxygen starvation. In his book, Paul describes very clearly what he experienced in this deeply unconscious state. He says he was fully aware that he was dying. Remember, he's got no brain function at this point. And moving from this state to experience the potential unification of his consciousness with that of the universe. As I lay there waiting, I felt myself die. Beautifully, ecstatically, transcendently, I saw eternity and shed the whole of myself joyfully in order to become unified with it. The most amazing description of the death process. But you might ask, why did Paul come back? And that's very simple, because his family wanted him back. They said, Paul, please don't die. They played him lots of his records and so on. And I'm pleased he did come back, because it gave me an opportunity to discuss the whole process of dying and the changes in consciousness at that time. So when Paul actually died, I was meant to be there, but again, I missed it by a day. His family were with him, and this time they were prepared and encouraged him to go. And his wife told me what happened. Paul awoke from a deep sleep and told me, this is the wife speaking, and told me, I must let Peter Fenwick know that there is nothing new. We've all been there before. What an amazingly wonderful validation of what the transition of death is like. So, in summary, then, the final transition, the crumbling of the ego, is the crumbling of the ego, and you get rid of the ego when you do your cleaning. Subject-object consciousness transforms to non-dual consciousness, and all is a divinity and a unity. So it's okay, guys. As I lay there waiting, I felt myself die beautifully, ecstatically, transcendently. I saw eternity and shed the whole of myself joyful in order to become unified with it. I mean, it's an amazing statement of Paul's. So a final story of communication from beyond. It's one I like very much, and you'll see why in a moment. I helped a friend to die, and I was with her and talked to her and told her about being curious and being able not to be afraid of the dying process, but to go with it and be curious about the next step. The sister of my friend asked while the patient was unconscious, so this is the dying patient's sister, asked in her mind, obviously, because the patient's unconscious, please send me a sign to say that you're all right. Okay, so on the day of her sister's memorial service, she opened a book in the middle she had not opened before, and this is what she saw. Be curious. Those three animals looking at the moon. I think that's totally, totally fascinating, because it's in fact exactly what we taught her to do. And this is the book. It's the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. So in summary then, it would seem that we were never born and will never die. So if that's the case, what are you guys afraid of? And don't forget to get rid of your existential terror by getting the app and doing your five ways of thinking about death every day. These are my colleagues, Sue Brain, Hilary Lovelace, Inika Kogam, and Dr. Una Colville. So thank you all very much for your attention. Get your app, and remember, have it deep in your memory. Be curious when you die. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Perfect timing. We got a nice amount of time for questions. There's been a veritable ton of chat over the course of the talk, but I think we'll go to the hands up. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. John Corder.
Yes, hello, Peter. I'm a little bit confused.
Hi, John.
Bit of a contradiction somewhere. You say we've got to sever all ties, but at the same time, it's so common that when people have a deathbed vision, their spouse is there waiting for them. If they sever the attachment, why would they be waiting for them?
Well, I don't think it's actually quite like that. What you're doing is you're giving up attachments which hold. If your parents have died, then just the attachment itself, the fact that you like your parents, etc., will probably be there. But on the other hand, you don't want to stay in this world. to be attached to your parents. And I think it works that way. So you're cleaning out the attachments to this world which holds you back. I mean, obviously, you'll go on with an attachment to your parents, and you'll see them sometimes.
Okay.
That helps.
Yes. Could I just ask one very more quick question? When we spoke over coffee last year at Beyond the Brain, you dropped a bombshell and told me that Monica Rentz had actually been asked to leave the hospital. Did she actually keep her position there or not?
Yeah, she did. She did. And what's more, what is really interesting is that, as I think I said on the first night, we have run a conference at the Royal Society of Medicine to show that death is an expansion of consciousness, not a reduction of consciousness. I think things are changing. And if you look at the literature, when I first came into this area, there were about 2 or 3 papers. You could be an international expert in just one day. It's much more difficult now because there's a lot more. And it's all pointing in the same direction.
Okay. Just one very last thing. I've been the same situation you've been in. Apparently your grandson or grandchild asked you what would happen. Would his guinea pig go to heaven when he died? Now, my grandson asked me exactly the same thing. And I thought immediately about you. I thought, well, I wonder what Peter Fenwick said to his grandson. What did you tell them, please? I need some help here.
Yes, this was when a fox, I think it was, got into my grandson's cage on the garden, and I think a couple of his hamsters had their heads bitten off. And so it was a really good time for death. Well, I didn't say the hamster was going to heaven because, well, heaven is quite a concept. I think what I did is I said, I'm not sure what happens to the hamster when he dies, but I can tell you a lot about what will happen to you when you die. And so I took that line rather than telling him about a hamster's death.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Jean McPhail. Jean, you'll need to...
Okay.
Yep, we can hear you now.
I started out life as a medical doctor. I did clinical practice for about 3 years, and during that time I saw at least 50 people dying, and 49 of them were screaming their heads off and absolutely terrified, and I didn't see any peace at all. And the one woman who went into it with great grace, she actually survived. And I was really impressed because it was more like what you're talking about. And she was a Christian lady who meditated and prayed. I mean, she had a practice. And I got the idea that the vast majority of people die in agony. That's what I saw. And that if you want to die peacefully, you really have to prepare it with the life that you live. But from what you're saying, I think the ideas are becoming more open to, you know, that we have a soul, that we can die in peace. It sounds like some progress is being made, and I'm very happy to hear that. But that's what I saw. Everybody I saw dying, it was really a horrible experience to witness because there was so much fear. They weren't letting anything go at all.
Gina, I think you're absolutely right. We're coming out, I think, of the dark ages of dying. And we're beginning to understand what the process is. And there's a very nice palliative care physician in Canada who asks people, are you afraid of dying, etc. And the ones who say they are, then she talks about near-death experiences to them. Well, look, this is the closest we can get, and it's not going to be like that. So they get reassurance, and all this this screaming because they don't want to go, etc., is short-circuited by their knowledge of the process. And we haven't done that. It's very, when we were gathering our data in the first palliative care unit we went to, we went back afterwards, and I was telling them all about deathbed visions, etc., etc. And the head of the hospice said to me afterwards, sort of very quietly in the corridor, "Peter, have you got your data wrong? Because I don't think any of those things happen here at all." But yet I was giving him the data of things which actually happened. And that's because there was, much less now, this gulf between the medical side and the nursing care. The nurses know all about it.
Yes.
And a very nice nurse I met again in Canada said, "Nobody in my hospice will die alone." And so what she did was she asked the patient to wait for a deathbed vision who she could name. And when she came, she told the patient to go with them again so they don't die alone. So, yeah, I think things are improving.
Thanks. I'm going to pass over to the next question now. Thanks so much, Jean.
It was a long time ago.
Thanks so much. Simon Cotton.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you very much indeed for your talk. My father died of septicemia, heavily medicated on morphine, and I just picked up on your comment that morphine is obviously used to control pain, but I do remember immense disorientation in his personal experience, to the extent that I had a conversation with the vicar about this and about how disorientating morphine and heavy sort of drugged individuals struggled in the process, as he put it, of passing cleanly through the tunnel. What are your comments on this, please?
My comments are that the whole question of how you deal pharmacologically with the dying is still very much an open question. And you certainly give morphine, but you shouldn't be giving enough to disorientate them. What they are doing now is giving midazolam. And midazolam, in fact, removes consciousness. So, in fact, what you're doing is when people start to become disturbed in the last phase of dying, you give them midazolam, and they go into a sort of hibernating state and die from there. It means that they don't actually see the dying process. So what's the question that you have asked is, should we go for euthanasia or should we not? Is it a good thing to go through the dying process, or is it not? Well, I think that if you know about it, then you won't get a lot of the effects that at the moment are so frightening to people. And so the call for euthanasia would be less. I think it's more treating people on the deathbed so that they can pass painfully. But your question is, will morphine disorientate? Yes, it will if it's not giving them the right dosage. So what one needs to do is make sure that it's doing its pain relief bit, but not the disorienting bit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Next question, I'm going to ask Nancy Trivolato to unmute and ask a question. Nancy was part of the film panel on Thursday night. Nancy.
Oh, hello. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Fenwick. I just wanted to ask about cases of near-death experiences that are actually reported negative experiences. I have been in a panel once. It was a TV show and the panel was discussing about different experiences, and I heard a gentleman telling an experience that was terrifying. Also, there are some books that describe these experiences, and when I read them, and of course it's the minority of the minority of the minority, but when I read them, I see some truthfulness in how they describe what they are witnessing beyond, truthfulness from other accounts, from out-of-body experiences accounts. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that, if possible, please.
Yes. I think negative near-death experiences are as important as positive ones. As you say, the majority are positive, but there are negative ones. In our series, we got, I think 4% were negative. The negative ones were really very interesting. They were mainly people abandoned in a energetic space is the best way that I can describe it. So it was abandonment and loneliness and not having any contact of any sort. So that was one type. The other type was much more that of a Christian hell. And in fact, one that comes to mind immediately is somebody was standing on the side of a pit and looking down into it. And she felt that she could see all the fires of hell down in the pit, and that was her NDE. And so that was a pretty negative NDE. I think really that the best way of looking at negative NDEs, the loneliness, I understand absolutely, because I think that's probably a reflection of what's going on in them at the time. But I like Eben Alexander's near-death experience, where it started off down amongst a tangle of things, and then as he became free of the tangle, he then came into the light and the butterfly and his daughter and all that. But the point was, it started off way down below, and he had to sort of fight his way back. So I think probably there is quite a bit to do with the personality of the person. And I think I'm surprised in many ways that there are so few negative near-death experiences. I think probably that it's highly tilted in terms of positive experiences.
Thanks, Peter. Peter Hardwick. Peter, if you can unmute.
Yes, that's it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Peter, I was so pleased that you spoke about the benefit of being curious about dying. As you know, I trained with Roger Walger in past life regression, and part of Roger's technique was at the end of physical death, go into the spirit world beyond. So with all the experiences I had of doing that, I have actually a great curiosity about what the process will be. I had one very profound past life experience when I was a Sufi near Damascus in the tradition of Ibn Arabi. And when I was a very old man laying there surrounded by friends, just right at the very end of my life, there was a woman sitting very close to me with, I describe as diamond shining eyes. And I knew, well, absolutely knew that she was, well, we use the word psychopomp, for example, that she had that faculty that she would be able to assist my soul to detach from my body and enter into the spirit world. A spiritual midwife, you can say. So even now, whenever I think of that vision or that experience, I feel intense warmth and joy about it. I do hope when my time comes, whenever that is, that there will be somebody there that has those faculties. Perhaps it's unlikely, but I would really like somebody to be there, not so much knowing that she would assist my soul to transit, but also having the deep spiritual communion with that person at the time. So thank you.
Well, I hope that will happen for you. Certainly one sees it. And I think a lot is to do with preparation, I really do. And I think the earlier you can get the egoic functions to collapse, the better, because then you become non-dual and then you become universal and much more spiritual.
I have just one other thing. I've noticed now, although I've still got good health, I've got some beautiful paintings in the house, and so I've already decided I'm going to ask the wives of two of my grandnephews to come and look around and see which ones that they would like. when it's my time to pass. Also, I know that I'll be buried on top of my dear wife, Godsey. It's interesting. I'm also wondering what to have written on my own gravestone.
Thanks for that, Peter.
Yes.
Peter and Peter. So we've got 5 minutes left. So Tanya and Armando.
Right. I was wondering, you mentioned ketamine as a way or a method to help experience death before it's actually time.
Yeah.
I was curious when you mentioned it, I don't know if I missed it, if this was something that was used for people who were already on their deathbed but not yet in the end phase, or if it's something else, like for people before that, way before that, to already have that during their life.
It's not being done yet. This is a proposal from the group in Liège that it should be used. And the argument is that if you have a ketamine experience, it's in many ways like the expansions you get as you die. And therefore, it would, in a sense, be preparing people for it. But you see, I think that if it was going to be used, you would need a unit that was used to doing it, and you'd have a process of tutoring people about what it is to die and give up your body, and in fact become non-dual. And so it would be, I would think, if I was running such a unit, I'd do it before people became too ill, so that they could actually remember the experience and talk about it. I think it's a nice idea. I like it. It takes one back to Aldous Huxley and his death and being given LSD by his wife on his deathbed. So you cannot say that he's the model, but ketamine, I think, would be a good drug for that.
Thanks,
Thanks, Peter. Simon James.
Thank you very much for a fantastic lecture. Really enjoyed it. The question I've got is, you touched upon this with the first speaker, but if you could just expand upon it, I'd be really appreciated. She mentioned it in this lecture and also a previous one in 2016, The Art of Dying, A Journey to Elsewhere. And my question is, in the experience of non-duality in a possible after-death state, would that not render a presumed lack of interest in communicating with the living? If it's important to call upon our deceased loved ones at the moment of dying, how would this be possible if they'd moved beyond an egoic state? Presumably they would be beyond desire or personal interest in a non-dual reality.
These are lovely questions. They really are. And I wish there were answers to them. But we have such a little information about what the dying process actually is. Okay, death of the body, no problems there. Consciousness goes on, no problems there. What form does it go on? It looks as if it's more of an energetic form. Will it be different from what we experience now? Yes, I would think pretty different, because I think most of us have had intense spiritual experiences, and we know that in them things are very different because they have a transforming effect on you. And rather like Paul, when in his example, when he was going to die and gave himself up happily to do it. So I think that the process, in fact, takes you on that way. So do you care about people? I don't know, because I don't know what happens after that. You see, you then come into after-death communications, but you probably heard the question I asked when they were doing after-death communications, that nobody's just done any work on that. What the actual process of dying is, according to those who have died, and I'd really like to see a detailed account of that.
Thanks, Peter. Right, so in terms of timing, we're now going to go into breakout rooms. Andrew, are you in a position to make that happen within the next 30 seconds or so, next minute or so?
Yes, indeed. I can start creating breakout rooms immediately. We've got, how many do you suggest per room? We've got a setting for 3 to 4 per room. I wonder if that, well, I should increase that a little bit.
I think increase that, yeah.
Okay. Good. So I'll start creating those now. So you'll see that an invitation appear on your screens, everyone. So if you'd like to go into a breakout room, just accept that invitation. And if you don't wish to, that's absolutely fine. Just don't accept the invitation. We'll be going to breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and then we'll bring you back in for the tea break.